All right, so we have a quorum of the committee present. We have Bob Lyons, Guthrie Dina Karen, Dan Ramsey, Carl Stumpf, and Kendra Wilkus.
All right. We have a quorum, so we can do business. Our first item is the minutes of June 27th.
Ramsey will move to approve the minutes.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second to the motion?
I do.
Guthrie seconds it. Any discussion with respect to the minutes? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the June 27 minutes are approved. Our next item is the TIA for the Bell Farm development, and I'll have to say this was a fairly extensive report, Sean. It took me the better part of an hour to memorize the data and all of those tables this afternoon.
Well, you're doing better than me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you memorized it in an hour, boy, oh boy.
Yeah, I couldn't even scroll through it in an hour, much less. Okay. Have to forgive me. I have very little voice here for some reason, so I'll do the best I can here, but my voice is pretty weak tonight. So Sean, are there things that you wish to point out with respect to this EIA?
Well, one of the things I had sent just as a heads up, that a lot of, in the report, a lot of the level of service, the modeling output, graphics, in talking with our consultant, we'd prefer, I think, to move that out of the body of the report and just into an appendix. And it's presented here in two different formats. Maybe I can jump to a couple of them. If you suffer vertigo, avert your eyes. But so one of them is sort of, maybe if I can zoom in just a bit. So one of them is kind of broken out by a scenario of modeling, and then it has all of the study intersections, right? If you go into one of the appendices, and I'm going to forget which one it is, but I think it was E. It kind of has a reverse view of that, where it's looking at an intersection, in this case, intersection 100, which is tied to the little map of studies. And then it lists all the different scenarios. And the kinds of questions I tend to field most are, what's going on with this intersection before, during, and after, right? Not under these conditions, what do all these intersections have? And then let's go to one in PM, and then let's go to one 30 years later. And you kind of have to find your intersection of interest in all those various tables. This pulls it all together for every scenario studied per intersection. It's a different way to go. For me, it's a little bit handier because, again, that's the kind of questions I tend to field. Not that I get a lot, but I did want to gauge your input on that for the future. And then that second issue was putting these just in an appendix, but not sort of cluttering the report, if you will.
Would you put both formats in that appendix or just the one?
They could put both in there. I don't know that we're going to learn much from sort of the one that we've traditionally looked at, which is not this one, of course. It's just here's a scenario, here's every intersection we'd studied under that scenario. And they use it mostly to report back, well, this one's got a level of service D, so that's a flag for us. If it's level of service A or B or something, no biggie. I mean, if you're interested, it's easy to look up, but what we're trying to figure out is where are the pinch points, where are the problem spots? Does the committee want it both ways?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't think that we need to repeat data in 2 different formats. There's enough of it here just in one format to take quite a bit of time to digest. So whichever one, Sean, you think is the easier to display the needed information seems to be fine with me.
And that's part of why I'm thinking it's easiest to put this just in an appendix anyhow, because it's going to be looked at by a handful of people, you know, and probably not as many people as might want to read the report. This could just be a slog or confusing, worse yet, to have just all this information that may not matter too much to most people.
I think the summary on page 15 is good for me.
Let me back up a bit. 15, you say?
It's in the executive summary.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is kind of a new thing where they kind of just summarize the entirety of the analysis area across various horizons. Boy, I'm having a hard time getting getting it to move here. Must just be too big a file. Yeah, so that's a good high-level summary, and then, like you say, the executive summary that goes with it is handy. And I think if you were really stuck on time and read just one section, go to section 9, which is the recommendations. You can always go backwards and fill in details as you need them. This particular one also had analysis and input on the design of Bellefontaine Boulevard, because we had asked for that separately. So that's chapter 8. Bruce Holler, who was on the call, had some correspondence with me. I think he reached out, I don't know, Thursday or Friday, but I was able to write back finally today. I've been in court for a week and now I'm on vacation, so productivity has not been good for me. But Bruce raised some points about this, and we'll get into that a little bit too. But these were the big things, I think, is, you know, do you want the charts in the report or just in an appendix? And secondly, if you have a preference, which format of the charts you would prefer?
I would just assume the charts be in the appendix. And I liked the second chart that you showed us.
By
That-
intersection.
Yeah, that's my personal opinion.
Okay.
I tend to concur with that.
Agreed.
Yeah,
That's good feedback for our consultant then. We're constantly taking new looks at this. Carl gave me a separate heads up that the executive summary here, while it mentions by a letter grade a bunch of levels of service, it doesn't within here explain what a D means. So that's not very helpful. And we can easily expand this to include a high-level summary of what do these letters mean, you know?
That would be really helpful because I was like, oh, they failed. Oh, they got a D. And then I was like, wait, they have an E.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful.
It's not like school. Yeah. So, okay, so that's good feedback. Were there any other technical
I
things?
thought never mind. I thought the D, E, and F actually referred to a location as opposed to a grade. Was I wrong in that?
It's called a level of service, and it's a measure by letter grade, really, of how the intersection or sometimes movements within an intersection function. So
Right,
it's kind of
but-
tied to delay, right? If you're waiting a long time or multiple cycles to get a green, that's pretty poor service. So you kind of get an F for that. If you don't have to wait so long, you can get an E or maybe a D. C is kind of our benchmark. We're shooting for that, but we'll live with a D if it's a major enough corridor because we just can't fix it at a reasonable cost. But E and F, nobody likes. And we'll get that into here. It's later in the report, but by the time you get to that, you probably forgot you saw this.
Do you want a motion on this, Sean, or can you just accept that as feedback?
No, for me, this was just feedback on format stuff
Okay.
that I kind of wanted to get a feel for, so I could tell the consultant, next time we do this, let's just do it this way. So
And that would not involve revising this report before it goes to the council, right?
No, actually, Public Works Committee approves these. It doesn't go to the council.
All right,
Unless the council wants to take it up, they certainly can, but typically that has not happened. So for the most part, and working with Bruce, he helped me revise my staff recommendations that were in the agenda packets to add a couple of things. One, so it would still be approval of the overall TIA for the Bell Farm development, but noting design guidance that the committee does not expect super elevation at the horizontal curves, which was mentioned in chapter 8. It suddenly got into a lot of super. If you're not familiar, with the term super elevation, it's just how you bank a curve. So you'd see at NASCAR all of a sudden, if the car's going to a curve, the flat road suddenly bends. And it's really intended to help reduce steering effort, but it's really uncommon at low speed urban roadways to do that, to build one side higher than the inside of the curve. So we don't often bank our curves. It's just one of the mentions in chapter 8. So I would encourage the committee to exclude that as guidance from design, but then to endorse implementation of the recommendations of chapter 9, as I had tried summarizing. And then also acknowledging that other intersections in the study area may experience some delay or safety concerns at some point in the future, but there's no recommended specific action that could be modeled, evaluated, recommended now. And just to keep an eye on those things.
Sean, what is the build out timetable for this Bell Farms development? That is supposed to go over what, a period of 5 years?
I think it's 5 phases, but Kathleen
phases.
is on the call and she might happen to know how many years that translates to.
Hello. I would say when we're looking at all, we've now reduced it to 4 phases. We've combined 2 phases, but I think when you're looking at all 4 phases, you're probably realistically looking at 10 to 15 years, for all phases.
Okay.
Okay,
Because, realistically, even with this first phase, by the time the multifamily gets done being constructed and everything's tight, you're talking like 3 years away, just even for the first phase. So I think it's fair to say you could probably use 10 as a good estimate.
all right.
And one other technical thing I wanted to mention that Bruce had pointed out to me is there was some confusion, I think, from discussion and a recommendation in chapter 8. And again, this gets into design more than traffic impact, but they cautioned that Sorenby Street, as it crosses Bellefontaine, would have an inverted crown. In other words, the center line would be lower than the curb lines because of the nature of the profile of Bellefontaine that you're crossing. It has kind of a low point there. Bruce and I agree that the take home here from a design perspective, though, really is that the cross slopes and grades of Bellefontaine Boulevard should control. They should just go right through the intersection like any major street would, and the side street needs to accommodate that. So if something has to warp a bit from a Serenby Street perspective, that's really normal. And we just wanted to clear that up. I think Bruce and I are in agreement on that, that would be normal. Did you, Bruce, have any other design or other concerns with the TIA input?
The only one I want to make sure that we have some flexibility on is there was a suggestion that we limit the grade on Bellefontaine to 5% if possible. I know back in February, I believe, when we were deciding on, when this committee was deciding on the horizontal and vertical limitations, there was in the city's ordinance, there's a typical 6% maximum grade on collectors, which is Bellefontaine. And I'd like to be able to maintain that 6% in small sections, just because of the terrain that we're working on out here. With our goal be trying to match some of the hills as best we can to minimize our cutting and or filling. I think even going from 6 to 5 is gonna have an impact, and I prefer to try to maintain that 6% as a maximum. So we aren't cutting through those hills as much.
Mm-hmm. And I know the committee previously had said that would be okay for short stretches to exceed 5%. The committee also said, that's subject to change if the TIA says otherwise. This TIA doesn't include a firm recommendation. It just says, if it's feasible,
Okay.
do that. So I don't see anything that contradicts the committee's previous take on that. And I know you've taken a look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay.
Unless the committee wants to take that back up, I would let the previous guidance roll.
Any desire to change that, or just go with what we decided before? Doesn't sound like there's much desire to make any change emanating from committee members. So
Okay.
I think we'll go with the way we had done it before.
Yeah. Good point, though, Bruce. So yeah, I don't know if there were any committee member questions about the report or anything in it, but if not, like I say, it would be appropriate, I think, to approve the report. Again, noting as design guidance that the committee has no expectation of super elevation, endorse implementation of Chapter 9 recommendations, and just acknowledge that there are other intersections that warrant keeping an eye on.
I have one question, and it's about that Parmenter Street, Schneider Road intersection.
Okay.
Is there a reason that traffic circle isn't being considered?
I think there aren't other traffic circles, roundabouts in the area. So we were just considering this a standard intersection with turn lanes, much like the one down at Graber and at Century and elsewhere.
Okay.
But that's all, just expectation.
Yeah, it could change in the future too.
All right, so Sean, what are you looking for here? Do you want one motion to approve the report and then other ones to do the various supplemental things that were in your memo?
I think that could all just be one motion. It's all kind of one topic that just says, yeah, we accept the report with the Chapter 9 recommendations and a host of other things to keep our eye on. And regarding Chapter 8, we're not looking for super elevation. At least that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, it appears to me as if Chapter 9 pretty much covers Sean's recommendations or in his memo.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, committee, anybody wish to offer a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the TIA for the Bell Farms site.
All right, is there a second to Carl's motion?
I will second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any further discussion or any discussion?
Sorry, just as a point of clarification, is that motion then to include the other sub parts of the overall recommendation about endorsing implementation of the Chapter 9 stuff, skipping super elevation, keeping an eye on
Yes.
the intersections?
That would be my intention, yes.
Okay.
All right. All right, further discussion with respect to the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have approved the TIA report. An extensive one.
It is. It was a big one. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, Bruce.
All right.
Clayton.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye now.
All right, item 3.
Right. Brad Hopwood is on the call. Dave Sarbacher's on the call too. I didn't see Dave earlier. Let me jot him down here quick. We ran into a situation recently where to fill an open utility, water and sewer utility crewman position, we didn't get any qualified applicants at all. Brad has been looking into a situation even longer than that, which was about CDL requirements to come in the door as a candidate to have already a Class A or in some cases a Class B CDL license, commercial driver's license. And so just as a matter of recruitment and retention, Brad prepared this memo and we wanted to bring it to the committee for a policy discussion decision about whether we could make some changes to help us find candidates who would be interested in working for the city, specifically really in field services positions that require a CDL, but maybe they don't have one yet. And they could then get a learner's permit prior to applying, which is, as I understand it from Brad, fairly straightforward. Then they could attend classes and take the test and get their CDL while working for the city.
That makes perfect sense. A lot of places are doing that now. It's
I think we used to, and we got ourselves so spoiled that we sort of dropped that and said, you know, if we're going to have all these applicants anyway, why not take the ones that already have their CDL? The pendulum has swung.
This is a smart change.
So in the past, you needed a CDL, so did you fund the renewals of those? Of course, the renewal costs seem to be pretty minimal.
I don't think
That
that,
only happens once every 8 years, I think.
Yeah.
I don't
You know,
think
I'm
that
just,
traditionally
what I'm used to, Sean, is, you know, in our engineering company, we would fund half of our renewal cost for a professional engineering license. And we would not fund necessarily the, you know, the getting that license. But in this case, you know, we obviously, as a professional engineering license, you take an exam, but you don't necessarily have to go to a course. So,
Mhm.
you know, the course is your university and your experience. So, but anyway, that's what I'm used to. But I think, I think basically changing it to having a learner's permit makes sense.
Another
Okay.
option might be just to raise the pay rates enough that you attract people with CDLs already.
Is that true? Does the, well, and right now the rule is you needed a CDL, right? So, I
Mhm.
mean, would you intend to pay less to the people with a learning permit?
No,
No, I
Okay.
certainly wouldn't think so.
So you don't necessarily get a raise when you get the CDL.
no. No.
My
Okay.
I
point
think
was, if the pay rates were higher, maybe you wouldn't need to deal with the learning permit at all. You would attract people who already have the full-fledged CDL.
But I still think you're gonna get a number of applicants that don't. Just by the nature of the work. And so I really don't think that this is a bad way to go.
No, I don't either. I just was throwing out the other option too.
And as I understand it now, Brad can chime in when I'm wrong. He could just throw something at me if he was here. But this renewal cost, as I understand it, is just the incremental difference between a regular, Class D license like I would have and a CDL license. So
Yeah,
it's just
that's correct.
funding the difference.
That's $5 a year.
Yeah, I think we could swing it. But at least that would be consistent with how we deal with other people's professional licensing. And
Okay.
as is necessary for their job. Now, one other wrinkle that Brian Walhopter offered to me today, because he didn't have a lot of time to react to this himself, was that we should consider, we could at least talk about some sort of provision that if an applicant comes in with their learner's permit, gets a CDL, and then goes and gets a different job that requires a CDL, can we recapture that money? I wasn't aware, but our new handbook does have a provision for exactly that. That says if within a year somebody gets some training, development, whatever, and then leaves, they have to pay us that money back. From 1 to 2 years, they pay back 66%. 2 to 3 years, they pay back 33%. And if they stay here 3 years, no harm, no foul. So I wanted to get your input on that because I did not know that at the time Brad and I were talking in between court date.
That is pretty much standard procedure for standard SOP for any contract, employment contract we enter into, right?
Okay.
It's pretty normal.
The other thing that Brian alerted me to is that the personnel committee typically wouldn't take up something like this, that he would just do it as the HR manager based on input from a department head. I don't tend to make policy decisions without the Public Works Committee, but he wasn't looking for a referral to the Personnel Committee as much as just, at this point, I wanted to get your input.
Quick question I have here. So the learner's permit is just based off a written test, right?
Brad, I think it is, right? Computer test?
Because I don't know. I mean, the general class D doesn't have a driving test anymore. I'm not sure about the commercial license.
So there's
So-
still a driving test for the commercial license.
So in order to get the
And that's part of number 2 right here, the driving test. It's $150. You have to go through that because they have to do a pre-trip inspection on the truck. They have to make sure you know what you're talking about. You know where the main parts of the engine are. And you
Okay.
can identify everything within that truck.
But for learner's permit, do you need?
For a learner's permit, it's just a test. You pay $30, you take the test. If you pass the test, you get your learner's permit. And that would be where my recommendation within this memo is that they have their learner's permit before they start deployment.
Mhm. So they'd have to have a commercial learner's permit just to apply. And that's, I thought you said you could do that over the internet even, just a written test?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so $30. And that doesn't seem like it's a bridge too high to push some buttons on an internet and pay $30. Get a learner's permit.
Yeah, it's a one-time fee. They don't make you, if you fail it, you don't pay it again.
Okay.
You don't pay until you pass.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, and that's, you know, that's a minimum requirement. If you're interested in the job and you know it's gonna have to you're gonna have to have a CDL, to pay $30 for a learner's permit is not much different than having to buy a pair of shoes. I mean,
I absolutely agree.
that's a pretty low bar.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. So yeah, so that's the proposal. I don't know if there's other input, but it doesn't have a huge cost to the city. I mean, this, if you look down, this all totals up to less than $750 to let someone train. There's a potential that it's going to take them a while. I mean, it could be between a couple weeks and 6 months to get their CDL, at which point then they could drive by themselves. So that's
So
some
what happens if they don't get the CDL, if they are not able to get through? Then how do you address it? How do you remediate? What are the exit measures or what are the remedial measures at that point? And secondly, what is the liability on a situation like this? For I'm not familiar with the licensing test. If,
Okay.
for example, if you take a student driver, as opposed to knowing something theoretically and being able to drive, they are not the same. Would this incur any liability for the city?
No, so in order for them to be able to drive a truck that requires a CDL, they have to have somebody that actually has a CDL with them. They cannot do it on their own. That's against the law. So if they do it on their own, that's against the law. And
Yeah,
they
that's
only
what-
have, from the day they get their learner's permit
Mhm.
until the day it expires is only 6 months. So if they don't get their CDL within that 6 months, that expires. And my assumption at that point is Sean would have a conversation with HR about possible termination of that employee.
At which point, then again, the cost, the normalization cost, you know, the phasing out, all of that would have to be relooked at. That's something the city would need to look at, because if the city is going to pay for all of this and then the person doesn't get through, then what happens?
Well, we get our money back, but the bigger problem is we have to start re-recruiting.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So it's two things. One, obviously, you know, you can't expect the person to pay you back, because if they, you know, if they would probably not get into this program if they are already capable of doing that, right?
Well, and for some it might be time, for some it might be, you know, that they're interested, but they just don't have, you know, $500 for a class.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, they may not be able to. That's what I meant.
Oh, okay.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of misinformation about ELDT and going about this, and a lot of it has to deal with when this came out, people were under the assumption they had to go to a truck driving school and they had to go through that kind of a class. So if we are able to say in a job posting, we're willing to pay for you to go to your class and your CDL, that intrigues more people to want to apply. Because right
Apply,
now
that's right.
we're seeing
Yeah.
a huge discrepancy in applicants.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it is a selling point from an education perspective. That I agree, but the exit also needs to be looked into.
Mhm.
If for whatever reason they're not able to satisfactorily get through the, you know, the testing and all of the process. And, you know, as he said, it's 6 months, which is 180 days. So all of this has to be complete within that time. And then how much time does the exit protocol need to be followed within?
Yeah, I think that would have to be a different decision, whether we, you know, extend that for a retest, or if we, you know, get people in testing at 5 months so that if they don't pass, they can retake it still within their 6 months.
Right.
But Brian could, in his role as HR, he could figure out those particulars. I mean, 6 months is kind of like a probationary period, and this is what you need to fill during your probationary period in order to have the job.
Right. he reminded me it's a training period, not a probationary period
Training period,
anymore,
yeah.
but it's,
Well, training period, whatever.
yeah. Yeah,
I'm old. It was probationary.
it's stuck in my head too.
Well, I would make a
But anyway,
motion
yeah.
that I would make a motion that we endorse these changes to the licensing requirement.
Is there a second to Dan's motion?
With, is that, Dan, with then the clawback provision for the first 3 years on a prorated basis?
Exactly
Yeah.
how we have it in the personnel ordinances, yes.
Okay,
All right, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
I will.
All
I
right.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And this now goes to the council?
no, I'll just take that to the HR manager instead.
Oh, okay. So this council's personnel committee doesn't need to look at this and weigh it.
That's what I've been told, yeah, I didn't know that, but now I do.
Okay. All right, very good. I think that brings us to the end of the agenda.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Brad and Dave.
Yes, thank you, guys.
Appreciate
I
it.
make a motion that we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
This is Wilkus. I'll second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it and we stand adjourned. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank you.
vacation, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Good.
Thank you, guys.